Welcome to the podcast, Stories from the World of Science. Our mission is to explain science in a simple and fun form that is open to all. A Russian Indiana Jones. It is no secret that the democracy of a given country hardly necessarily reflects the support given to science by its authorities. It has often been the case that totalitarian countries were more generous towards science than their democratic neighbors. Of course, this observation only holds true as long as scientists do not interfere with government policy, and only if their achievements contribute to boosting the country's reputation. If a scientist succeeds in obtaining the image of a national hero, any government, especially a totalitarian one, will love him. When Russia was immersed in revolutionary turmoil during both world wars, Russian genetics and agricultural science were among the most advanced in the world. The greater part of the success of Russian life sciences in the first half of the 20th century may be attributed to a young, talented, and hardworking agronomist and outstanding organizer, Nikolai Ivanovich Vavilov. Nikolai was born in Moscow in 1887 as the oldest of 4 children in a wealthy merchant family. His younger brother Sergei became a renowned physicist and the president of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. Nikolai himself had been interested in science ever since he was a young boy. He graduated at the Moscow Agricultural Institute in 1911 and began his scientific career in the field of applied botany or cultivated plants. The crucial moment in his scientific development came in 1913, when his superiors decided to send him to England to further his knowledge in genetics. William Bateson, for whom Nikolai worked for a while, was at the time the world's foremost geneticist and had a great influence on the young scientist. Nikolai returned to Russia shortly after the outbreak of the First World War, swiftly finished his postgraduate studies, and became a professor of agronomy and genetics at the Saratov University. Soon after the Russian Revolution of 1917, Lenin appointed him chairman of the Institute of Applied Botanics in Leningrad, which, under his leadership, quickly became the world's foremost institution in the field of cultivated plants research. At the peak of his career around 1934, Nikolai employed 20,000 assistants from all across the Soviet Union. Surprisingly, neither Nikolai nor his younger brother Sergei ever joined the Communist Party. They did, however, support the social and economic goals of the revolutionary regime. Nikolai Vavilov was incredibly energetic and hardworking. According to accounts given by his colleagues, he slept only a couple of hours a day, requiring his technicians to be in the field at 4 o'clock in the morning, ready to start work. As he understood the basics of genetics, which he acquired during his studies in Europe, he knew that crossbreeding would enable him to create better and more disease-resistant plants, as long as he had enough different species of plants at his disposal. The idea was simple. In order to grow the best plants for producing food, he needed to obtain a larger assortment of plant species, so that he could crossbreed and discover those which were the most appropriate for cultivation. The more different varieties of wheat, rice, and potato from different parts of the world he had, the easier it was to grow new sorts with higher immunity. Of course, he did not have a collection of different varieties of plant seeds at that particular time, so he took advantage of his position at the Institute of Applied Botanics and organized more than 100 scientific expeditions to Asia, Africa, America and the Middle East, gathering samples of more than 10,000 plant species. Vavilov traveled to distant mountains, forests and meadows, sending rare sorts of food plants, such as rice, wheat, corn, barley, oats and potato back to his institute in Leningrad. Naturally, he was also very interested in hitherto lesser-known crop plants such as lentils, chickpeas, soybeans and several others. He created the largest seed bank in the world, containing more than 200,000 samples, 30,000 of which alone were sorts of wheat. Some of the plants he discovered were still unknown in Europe at that time. Sometimes, Vavilov could acquire his plant seeds from markets in remote places with relative ease. At other times, however, he encountered greater difficulty. One such occasion was when he barely managed to return alive from one of his African expeditions to Ethiopia in the 1920s. In his writings, he describes how he had to paddle his way among threatening giant crocodiles of the Blue Nile, searching for a rare sort of wheat and barley. One night, he was attacked in his tent on the river bank by a swarm of spiders and scorpions. These he succeeded in tricking back outside by lighting an oil lamp in front of the tent, and so luring the dangerous creatures back out. Even deeper in the African wilderness, he was taken prisoner by armed bandits whom he later evaded by means of a proven Russian method. He got his captors drunk on some fine vodka, and escaped when they fell into an inebriated sleep. In 1923, he built more than 100 experiment stations for testing crop plants. A few years later, he united all of his research centers under the Lenin Academy of Agricultural Sciences and became its president. During the same year he was elected a life member of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. In 1926, he published his famous treatise on the geographical origin of cultivated plants. He argued that every existing domesticated plant has its particular place of origin somewhere on the planet where it is also possible to find the greatest genetic diversity of this individual species. If, for example, we were searching for new sorts of potato, we would do best to look for them in South America, because potato originates in the area of today's Peru, Ecuador, and Bolivia. When Nikolai was in charge of the institute, Russian plant geneticists were among the best in the world. He openly supported international cooperation and the transmission of new knowledge from the West. This was of great benefit to Russian science, but did not comply with the regime's ideology. When Stalin's agricultural reform with Soviet collective farms failed to have the required success, the regime needed a scapegoat. Nikolai Ivanovich Vavilov was a suitable victim, as he had already been exposed to criticism on account of his expensive and frequent journeys to far corners of the earth. Vavilov tried to defend himself, but his arguments did not help. The greater part of the most important positions in the field of Soviet biological and agricultural research were appointed to the charismatic yet poorly educated agronomist Trofim Denisovich Lysenko, who caught the government's attention with his alternative approach to biology. He argued for a sort of Lamarckism. In his opinion, Vavilov's method of searching for new species of plants by crossbreeding was excessively abstract and bourgeois. He suggested a far simpler, and in his view more effective method of training plants, to teach them how to adapt the necessary form and structure that would enable them to produce the maximum possible amount of food. Lysenko personified the mythical ideal of the Soviet country boy genius, who offered Stalin's regime heroic achievements of genuine homemade science. When he was awarded the Order of Lenin, the Pravda newspaper published a letter of thanks from his parents, addressed to Stalin himself. The day we found out that our Trofim was awarded the Order of Lenin was the happiest day of our lives. How could we have ever even dreamed of such a great honor bestowed on us, poor farmers from the village of Karlovka? Lysenko's agricultural miracles did not work in practice. The greatest damage his lack of knowledge caused his country's economy was inflicted when he nearly destroyed the Soviet dairy industry. By crossbreeding pedigree cows with common bulls he managed to ruin the achievements of several generations of elaborate cattle breeding. Moments away from the Second World War, Stalin's purges finally caught up with Nikolai. On August 4, 1940, he was arrested on a trip to the Ukraine and charged with sabotage and collaboration with bourgeois reactionary forces. At first, he was sentenced to death, but the punishment was later commuted to 10 years of imprisonment after his brother Sergei intervened. When he became a member of the Distinguished British Royal Society in 1942, the Russian secret police reopened his case, but they were too late. Even though Vavilov had dedicated his life to studying agrarian sources of food, he died of starvation in his cell on January 16, 1943. There is an anecdote from the siege of Leningrad during the Second World War which attests to Vavilov's personal charisma and influence. When people were dying of hunger on the streets of the city, a few of his colleagues selflessly guarded the institute with the priceless collection of seeds they had gathered with great effort from remote parts of the world. At least 10 of his colleagues succumbed to starvation, without even touching the valuable samples of potato, rice, corn and other crops from faraway places. You just listened to the podcast, Stories from the World of Science, written by Sasho Dolines.